You're not a man, you're a weapon. You'll kill someone with that. The heavy crystal tumbler shattered against the vanity mirror, sending shards of glass exploding across the master suite. Kim Soo-in, Seoul's most glamorous socialite, scrambled to button her silk blouse, her hands shaking so hard she missed the loops. I don't care how rich you are, she choked out, backing away in terror. It's not human. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut. Silence suffocated the room. Park Seo-joon stood shirtless in the shadows, the intricate dragon tattoos on his chest rising and falling with his heavy breathing. He looked down at his hands, hands that could crush a man's windpipe. That was the 7th time. The fear in her eyes confirmed what he had always known. He wasn't a man meant for love. He was a monster. His phone buzzed. It was his underboss, but Seo-joon threw the device across the room. He didn't care about the territory anymore. 3 months later, the penthouse was a tomb of dust and darkness. Seo-joon sat in his self-imposed exile until the door creaked open. Bodyguard Lee stepped in. Boss. You need to eat. And I found someone to clean the mess. Seo-joon looked up, ready to lash out, but his eyes landed on her. A woman in a black and white uniform. Jazz Carter. She tightened her grip on the cleaning bucket, looked up at the towering, tattooed giant, and didn't flinch. Get out, Seo-joon growled, his voice gravelly and dangerous. Don't look at me. Jazz stood her ground, her voice steady. I'm not here to look, sir. I'm here to clean. The penthouse smelled of stale whiskey and neglect, a sharp contrast to the gleaming skyline of Seoul visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a man who controlled the city's underworld with surgical precision, Park Seo-joon had allowed his sanctuary to rot. He sat on the Italian leather sofa, shirtless, watching the new maid through the haze of cigarette smoke. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the marble floor, the rhythmic shoo-shoo of her brush grating against his raw nerves. He didn't want her here. He didn't want anyone here. Witnesses meant judgment, and he was done being judged. I didn't tell you to start, Seo-joon snapped, his voice rough. He flicked his cigarette, sending a shower of gray ash onto the spot she had just polished. Leave it. Jazz didn't look up. She didn't flinch at the ash drifting onto her knuckles. She simply wiped it away with a damp cloth and continued scrubbing. Her silence infuriated him. Women usually filled the silence around him with nervous chatter or terrified apologies. This one just worked. Are you deaf? Seo-joon stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow over her. With a sudden, violent motion, he kicked a stack of old takeout boxes near his feet. Half-eaten noodles and cold sauce splattered across the expensive rug. This place is a graveyard. It's not meant for the living. Go home. Jazz finally stopped. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her dark curls were pulled back, exposing the weary set of her jaw. She looked at the mess, then up at him. Her eyes weren't filled with the fear he was used to, they held a heavy, exhausted resolve. I can't go home, Mr. Park, she said, her voice calm but tight. My brother owes money to people who don't ask nicely. I need this paycheck. So unless you're going to physically throw me out, I'm going to clean up those noodles. Seo-joon loomed over her, the dragon tattoo on his neck flexing as he clenched his jaw. He was used to terror. He was used to being the monster in the room. But looking at her, he realized she wasn't afraid of monsters. She was afraid of poverty. She was afraid of losing her family. He grabbed a bottle of scotch from the table, intending to smash it, to make the loud noise that usually sent people running. But his hand hovered in the air. Jazz had already turned back to the mess, picking up the carton with steady hands. She wasn't playing his game. Fine, he muttered, sinking back into the shadows of the sofa. Clean. But don't expect me to make it easy. I never expect easy, she murmured, dipping her rag into the bucket. The water turned gray, swirling with the filth of his exile, but she kept scrubbing, reclaiming his home inch by inch from the darkness he had invited in. It was past 2 a.m. when the elevator doors slid open, exhaling the metallic scent of rain and fresh blood into the penthouse. Jazz was still awake, folding towels in the laundry room, when she heard the heavy, uneven footsteps dragging across the hardwood she had spent all day polishing. She found him in the kitchen, gripping the granite island with white-knuckled force. Park Seo-joon looked like he had walked through hell. His knuckles were raw, split open and weeping crimson, and a jagged slash ran down his left forearm, slicing through the ink of a snarling tiger. Blood dripped steadily onto the floor. Drip. 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 "Mr. Park," she gasped, dropping the towel. "Don't," he rasped, not looking at her. His voice was tight. "Go to your room, Jazz." She ignored him. She had learned quickly that listening to his commands usually meant letting him rot in his own misery. She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with the emergency kit she'd found under the sink on her first day. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to the bar stool. Seo-joon turned his cold glare on her, eyes narrowed. "I said leave it. It heals. It's deep, and it's ruining the floor," she countered, her voice unwavering despite the adrenaline thrumming in her veins. "Sit." To his own surprise, he obeyed. He sank onto the stool, the adrenaline of the fight fading into a dull, throbbing ache. He watched warily as she uncapped the antiseptic. He expected her hands to shake. He expected the smell of blood to make her gag. Instead, her movements were efficient, almost clinical. "This will sting," she murmured. She pressed the alcohol-soaked gauze to the open gash. Seo-joon didn't blink. He had taken knives, bullets, and beatings without making a sound. Pain was a language he was fluent in. She threaded the needle. He watched the silver tip pierce his skin, sewing the edges of the flesh back together. He remained stone still, a statue of stoic endurance, his breathing slow and controlled. "Done," she whispered, cutting the thread. Then, she did something he wasn't prepared for. She didn't pull away immediately. She took a warm, damp cloth and gently wiped the dried blood from the uninjured skin around the wound. Her fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of his inner wrist, her touch soft, reverent, and terrified of causing him more pain. Seo-joon flinched violently, jerking his arm back as if she had branded him with hot iron. The sudden movement knocked the bottle of antiseptic over, the plastic clattering loudly in the silence. Jazz froze, her eyes wide. "Did I hurt you?" Seo-joon stared at her, his chest heaving, his pupils blown wide. It wasn't pain. It was the terrifying shock of tenderness on a body built for violence. "No," he whispered roughly, standing up and retreating into the shadows of the hallway before she could see his composure crack. "You didn't. The schedule on the refrigerator said he was at a meeting in Gangnam." That was the only reason Jazz felt safe entering the master bathroom to collect the laundry. The room was a cavern of black marble and humidity, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood soap. She reached for the wicker hamper, humming softly to herself, but the sudden, sharp silence of the shower cutting off made her freeze. She wasn't alone. Before she could retreat, the heavy glass door swung open. Park Seo-joon stepped out onto the bath mat, water sluicing down the hard planes of his chest, darkening the dragon ink that wrapped around his torso. He reached for a towel, but stopped dead when he saw her reflection in the vanity mirror. He was naked. Completely. Jazz turned, intending to run, but her feet betrayed her. She was rooted to the spot, her eyes wide. In the harsh vanity lights, there was nowhere for him to hide. The physical anomaly that had sent Kim Soo-in screaming from the penthouse, the sheer, intimidating scale of him, was on full display. Seo-joon's muscles locked, his body turning into a rigid wall of tension. A cold, familiar dread washed over him. He waited for it. The scream. The look of revulsion. The accusation that he was a freak of nature. He braced himself for her to scramble for the door, just like the others. But the scream never came. Jazz stared, her breath hitching in a soft, audible gasp that echoed in the damp silence. Her eyes traveled down, widening in shock, yes, but not in terror. She didn't look like she was staring at a weapon. She looked like she was staring at a man. A deep, dark flush crept up her neck, heating her cheeks. She bit her lip, her gaze snapping back up to his face, her expression one of mortification, not fear. I thought you were out, she stammered, her voice breathless. She clutched the laundry basket to her chest like a shield, but she didn't back away. The air in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't the cold, sharp scent of fear. It was something heavier. Something hotter. Seo Jun stood paralyzed, water pooling at his feet. She was blushing. She was embarrassed. She was overwhelmed. But she wasn't scared. For a monster who had only ever known how to inspire terror, the realization hit him harder than a bullet. "Get out," he whispered, but the venom was gone from his voice, replaced by a stunned, breathless confusion. "Yes, sir," Jazz squeaked, turning on her heel and fleeing the room, leaving him standing alone in the steam, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from rage, but from the terrifying possibility that she hadn't wanted to leave at all. The heavy oak doors of the study clicked shut, sealing them inside. Jazz froze, her feather duster hovering over a stack of leather-bound ledgers. She didn't need to turn around to know he was there. The air in the room had instantly become heavier, charged with the static electricity that seemed to radiate off Park Seo-jun. "Stop cleaning," he commanded. She turned slowly. He was leaning against the doorframe, fully dressed in his dark suit now, but the memory of him in the shower, raw, massive, and exposed, hung between them like a physical weight. He didn't look angry. He looked desperate. "We need to talk about what you saw," he said, pushing off the door and walking toward her. He moved like a predator, eating up the space until he was towering over her, backing her against the heavy mahogany desk. "It was an accident, sir." "I apologized," Jazz said, clutching the duster like a weapon. "It's not about an apology," Seo Jun's voice dropped, rumbling deep in his chest. "It's about survival. Do you know why this house is empty, Jazz? Do you know why the last maid left? Why the women before her left?" He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she could smell the sandalwood soap on his skin. "Because I am not built for softness. I am not built for comfort." His eyes were dark, searching hers for the panic he was sure was there. 7 women. 7 times I tried to be normal. They didn't just leave. They ran. They got hurt. He placed a hand on the desk beside her hip, boxing her in. "I am too much. For anyone. If you stay here, if you keep looking at me like that, you are going to get crushed." The silence stretched, tight as a violin string. Jazz looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't shrink away. She saw the warning for what it was, not a threat, but a confession. He was trying to protect her from himself. She straightened her spine, forcing him to look her in the eye. "You think you're the only one with scars, Mr. Park. You think you're the only one who knows what pain looks like." She stepped forward, closing the inch of distance between them, challenging his dominance. "I've fought for everything I have," she whispered, her voice fierce. "I've had a hard life. I've scraped and clawed just to survive. So you can be big, and you can be scary, and you can warn me all you want. But I don't break easy." Seo Jun stared at her, stunned into silence, the walls he had built around his isolation trembling for the first time in years. The monsoon rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Seoul skyline into a blurred watercolor of gray and neon. Inside the penthouse, the world had shrunk to the distance between them on the velvet sofa. The bottle of scotch on the table was half empty, the amber liquid stripping away the last remnants of protocol between boss and maid. "You should go to your room," Seo Jun murmured, staring into his glass. "The storm is getting worse." "I'm not afraid of thunder," Jazz replied softly. She was sitting closer than she ever had before, her knee almost brushing his thigh. The heat radiating from her was intoxicating, a siren call he knew he should resist but couldn't. He turned to look at her, his eyes dark with a hunger he had starved for months. It's not the thunder you should be afraid of. The warning hung in the air, fragile and useless. Jazz reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she took the glass from his hand and set it on the table. Then, she placed her hand on his chest, right over the dragon tattoo, feeling the heavy, frantic thud of his heart. "Stop warning me," she whispered. "The dam broke." Seo Jun groaned low in his throat and pulled her to him, capturing her mouth in a kiss that was desperate, rough, and terrified. It tasted of whiskey and salvation. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bedroom as the thunder shook the building, laying her down on the silk sheets like she was made of glass. But as the clothes fell away and the reality of his body was laid bare between them, the panic returned. He froze, his muscles locking up as he hovered over her. The sheer scale of him was undeniable, a physical fact that had caused only pain in the past. He saw her eyes widen, saw the sharp intake of breath, and he started to pull away. "I can't," he rasped, the shame burning his throat. "Jazz, I can't. You'll get hurt. It's too much." "Look at me," Jazz commanded, her voice breathless but firm. She reached up, framing his face with her hands, forcing him to look at her instead of retreating into his head. "I am not them. I am not breakable." "It doesn't fit," he argued, his voice cracking. "I will tear you apart." "Let me decide that," she said. She shifted, her body soft and yielding against his hardness. "Slow down. Let me guide you." It was a battle of inches. A slow, agonizing progression where pleasure and pain danced on a razor's edge. Seo Jun was trembling, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought his own instinct to dominate, terrified of unleashing his full strength. But Jazz was there, her hands anchoring him, her breath hitching but never stopping. When they finally connected, he stopped dead, waiting for the scream. Instead, she let out a long, shaky exhale, her nails digging into his shoulders. "See," she whispered against his lips, tears of exertion in her eyes. "I've got you. You're home." And for the first time in his life, the monster didn't destroy. He was held. For the first time in months, Park Seo-jun stepped into the daylight of Gangnam, not to break bones, but to buy a dress. He stood in the VIP section of the exclusive boutique, his presence so imposing that the sales assistants trembled as they pinned the hem of the emerald silk gown Jazz was wearing. She looked at him in the mirror, eyes wide and uncertain. "This is too much, Seo-jun. It costs more than my brother's debt." "It costs nothing to me," he replied, his voice low. He walked up behind her, placing a large, tattooed hand possessively on her waist. He didn't care who saw. He wanted them to see. He wanted the city to know that the monster had found something precious to guard. Across the street, watching through the tinted window of her Porsche, Kim Soo-in felt her coffee turn to acid in her stomach. She gripped the steering wheel, her manicured nails digging into the leather. It wasn't possible. That was the beast she had fled from, the man she had called a weapon, a freak. He was supposed to be rotting in that penthouse, ashamed of his existence. Instead, he was standing in the window of Seoul's most expensive store, touching that maid, with a tenderness he had never shown her. "A maid," Soo-in whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "He replaced me with the help." The jealousy that flared in her chest wasn't about love, it was about ego. She had rejected him because he was too much to handle, a physical impossibility. Yet here was this nobody, this foreigner, standing tall in his shadow, looking at him not with fear, but with adoration. It made Soo-in look weak. It made her look like the one who had failed. She threw the car into gear, tires screeching as she peeled away from the curb. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the Red Dragon nightclub in Itaewon. Han Tae-young was in his office, counting stacks of cash, when his men let her in. The rival boss looked up, a cruel smirk playing on his scarred lips. "Kim Soo-in. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Did the monster finally scare you back to the real world? He's not hiding anymore, Suyin spat, pacing the room. And he's not alone. Han paused, his interest piqued. Seo Jun never lets anyone close. He doesn't trust anyone. He trusts her, Suyin said, her voice dripping with venom. A black maid. He's buying her gowns. He's holding her hand in public. He's soft for her, Tae-young. I saw it in his eyes. Han leaned back, steepling his fingers. Park Seo-jun, soft. That sounds like an opportunity. It's not just an opportunity, Suyin said, slamming her hand on his desk. It's his throat. You wanted his territory. You wanted to break him. Stop attacking his soldiers. Go after the girl. She is the only thing in this world that can make him bleed. Marcus Carter spat a mouthful of blood onto the concrete floor of the underground gambling den. He had lost everything at the baccarat tables, his savings, his dignity, and now, it seemed, his life. But Han Tae-young, the scar-lipped boss of the rival syndicate, wasn't asking for money anymore. The debt is 50 million won, Marcus, Han said softly, crouching down to look the trembling man in the eye. He held up a grainy photo of Jazz, taken from a distance as she entered Seo Jun's building. You can't pay it. We both know that. So, I'm offering a trade. She has nothing to do with this, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. She's just a maid. She is Park Seo Jun's weakness, Han corrected, his eyes cold and dead. And you are the only way to get to her. Seo Jun has her guarded like a fortress. But she'll come out for her brother, won't she? Han pressed the barrel of a gun against Marcus's kneecap. Call her. Tell her you're hurt. Tell her to meet you behind the market. Or I blow your leg off right now. Sobbing, broken by fear, Marcus pulled out his phone. He typed the text that would sign his sister's death warrant. Jazz was humming as she navigated the crowded aisles of the Itaewon grocery market. For the first time in months, she felt light. The nightmares of the penthouse had turned into dreams. She picked out fresh peppers and spices, planning to make a stew that would finally put some warmth into Seo Jun's stoic frame. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, I'm in trouble. Bad guys. Meet me in the alley behind the market. Please, Jazz. I'm scared. Her heart stopped. She didn't think, she just reacted. Clutching her grocery bags, she bolted toward the rear exit, ignoring the warning bells ringing in her head. She pushed through the heavy metal doors into the quiet, trash-strewn alleyway. Marcus, she called out, stepping into the shadows. There was no Marcus. Only a black van with the engine idling. Before she could turn, a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. She dropped the groceries, a jar of peppers shattering against the asphalt, a cruel echo of the whiskey glass that had started it all. She kicked and scratched, sinking her nails into a leather jacket, but a needle pricked her neck. Sleep, little maid, a rough voice whispered in her ear. The world tilted sideways. The last thing Jazz saw before the darkness swallowed her was the screen of her phone, lying in a puddle of spilled sauce, lighting up with a call from Mr. Park. The phone sat on the granite island, vibrating like a bomb waiting to detonate. Seo Jun pressed answer. I have her, Han Tae-young's voice crackled, smug and wet with anticipation. Sign over the Gangnam deeds, Seo Jun. Or I send the maid back to you in pieces. 1 finger for every hour you delay. Seo Jun didn't speak. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He didn't feel fear. He felt a terrible, icy clarity. No deal, Seo Jun whispered. Then she dies, Han spat. I'm not trading, Seo Jun said, his voice void of humanity. I'm cleaning. He hung up. He didn't call for backup. He didn't summon the syndicate. This wasn't business, it was personal. He walked to the closet, bypassing the Italian suits, and grabbed a long, dark trench coat. Underneath, he wore nothing but his rage and the dragon ink that marked him for death. The Red Dragon nightclub pulsed with bass and neon in the pouring rain. The bouncers barely had time to register the massive shadow detaching itself from the darkness before Seo Jun was upon them. He didn't use a gun. He used his hands. The first man flew through the glass doors, his chest caved in by a single, devastating punch. Seo Jun stepped over the shards, entering the chaotic strobe lights of the dance floor. The music pounded, a rhythmic thud that matched the violence he unleashed. Han's soldiers swarmed him with knives and batons, but they were fighting a landslide. Seo Jun moved with terrifying efficiency. He caught a swinging bat with one hand, snapped the attacker's arm with a sickening crack, and used the man as a shield against the next wave. He was a titan among children, his size, the very thing he had loathed, the thing that had made him feel like a freak, now serving as an unstoppable engine of destruction. He tore through the club, leaving a wake of broken bodies and silenced screams. He didn't run. He walked. Relentless. Inevitable. Kim Soo-in was right, he thought as he hurled a man across the bar, shattering rows of bottles. He was a weapon. And tonight, he would fire until the chamber was empty. He reached the heavy steel door of the VIP office, blood dripping from his knuckles, and kicked it off its hinges. The office was a wreckage of shattered glass and splintered wood. Han Tae-young stood behind his mahogany desk, using Jazz as a shield, a pistol pressed hard against her temple. She was bruised, her uniform torn, but her eyes were locked on Seo Jun, not with fear, but with relief. "Stay back." Han screamed, his voice cracking. "I'll kill her. I swear I'll." He never finished the sentence. Seo Jun didn't negotiate. He didn't pause. He snatched a letter opener from the floor and threw it with terrifying precision. The blade buried itself in Han's shoulder. As Han screamed and the gun wavered, Seo Jun closed the distance. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Seo Jun vaulted the desk, crashing into his rival with the force of a freight train. They hit the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Han tried to bring the gun around, but Seo Jun caught his wrist. There was a sickening snap, a guttural roar, and then silence. Seo Jun stood up slowly, his chest heaving. Han Tae-young lay motionless at his feet. The silence that followed was deafening. Seo Jun looked down at himself. His white shirt was gone, his chest and hands coated in thick, crimson blood, some his, mostly Han's. The dragon tattoo was drowned in red. The monster was fully revealed. He looked at Jazz. She had managed to free her hands and was standing up, trembling. Seo Jun took a step back, the adrenaline crashing into a wall of shame. He held up his blood-slicked hands, palms out, warning her away. "Don't," he rasped, his voice broken. "Don't come near me. I'm dirty." He waited for the revulsion. He waited for her to see the beast that had slaughtered a room full of men and run. But Jazz didn't run. She stepped over the body of the man who had threatened to kill her and walked straight into the blood. She reached out, her small, dark hands gripping his forearms, ignoring the gore that smeared onto her skin. "You came for me," she whispered. "I am a killer," Seo Jun choked out, unable to meet her gaze. "No," Jazz said fiercely, forcing his head down until their foreheads touched. "You are mine." She pulled him down, crashing her lips against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, tasting of iron and tears, a seal on a blood oath that bound them together. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them, the monster and the maid who loved him. Seo Jun closed his eyes, surrendering to the warmth, finally believing he was safe. He didn't see the window behind them shatter silently. He didn't see the tiny, red laser dot dance across the room, settling directly over his heart.